this is what is expected and how you should do it. But to your point, your training is, at times, I would suggest, is in direct conflict with what I just saw on Facebook, YouTube, heaven forbid, TikTok. And so therefore, your training is in competition with this, and I've got 20 million views here, and how many did you have? 30 in a class or what have you? How do we adjust that, both of you? How do we deal with that?
So I think first, and many agencies have done this, right? They have done citizen police academies. That was one of the best things I ever did when I was a police officer, and lucky enough to coordinate that program, because I would bring in 20 plus individuals from across demographics, across the city would come to learn an 11-week program about what we did and why we did it. Part of that, I would put them in the police car. And I would say, okay, you're now going to stop me in traffic. You get that vantage point of what our officers get. See what they do, see what it's like, and teach them, here are the threats that can come at you. And you could almost see it. You could almost see the light bulbs going off to go, oh, okay, now I know why they do what they do. And that's just a moderate effort there. But when you come to social media, I applaud agencies that get active in social media. They try to meet people where they are, and let's face it, this is where people are.
Exactly.
So I've seen videos from some agencies that are proactive to talk about, okay, when an officer does this, understand why. This is the experience you have. This is the real world of why we do what we do. So I think it's possible. Are you going to get everybody? No, but I think that effort helps a long way. There's last thing, and again, I'm known for talking too much. We get along well, JW.
Absolutely.
Is when, and this was one of the pillars, the training pillar of the President's report on 21st century policing back in, I think, 2015 it was published, to involve the public in training. If you invite public to see what you do, why you do it, it can help change the minds, or at least have an understanding. They may not 100% agree, but at least they understand, and you get less of that stones thrown at you afterwards. That can be difficult to do, because if you bring somebody in whose sole purpose in being is to be an aggravator, and a disruptor, then that can harm the training. But if it's somebody who's objective, I think it could be a real help.
Scott, your thoughts on what you do as a school resource trainer, as a developer of that lesson plan, as a person that understands and can teach active shooter. What are we missing? And of course, we're kind of in, we should know overtime here, so I'm not really worried about a break right now. I want to give you plenty of time to just kind of address that, because if you had that potential, that capability of saying, I'm going to move the dial one way or the other to help folks better understand what you do and what their expectations of police are, because you're the core part of what that expectation is. What would you say to them? What would you say to folks? Look, here's what you need to know, and I'm going to lay it out for you.
Well, that the main thing you need to understand is you got officers, like in my case that I deal with mainly are school resource officers. You got officers who are moms and dads at home. They come from very diverse backgrounds, and simply they have a job to do, just like the cashier at Walmart has a job to do, the plumber that comes to fix your leaky pipe has a job to do. That SRO has the same job, and nobody knows their job any better than they do. So take the time to learn, especially if you have a student in school, to learn who your SRO is, who your child's SRO is, and talk to them. I would constantly be out in a car rider line or working ball games and have conversations with parents. And sometimes they would ask questions about, why do you do certain things, or why does the school not do this? And having those conversations, those back and forth conversations are great, because it gives them an understanding of our role as a school resource officer, and then we also get that understanding from them as, what's a parent looking for in their SRO? I do that sometimes with students. If I travel to our Western campus, a lot of times there's a ball game going on in a local high school, I'll try to contact that SRO and go. And I'll see a couple of students gathered around, and I'll just say, hey, what do you think about your SRO? And more often than not, I get very positive comments as to what that SRO is doing. And I just think a lot of times the students in the school know that, but is that being told to their parents and to the general public? Probably not. I think we're fortunate coming from Sampson County. We got some pretty good people here, where I see and hear a lot of things in some of your more your larger areas, larger jurisdictions, that they deal with things that we don't necessarily deal with as much. So we're fortunate, but I think having those conversations with law enforcement and the public, just like as Trevor was saying with the Citizens Academies, is important. Coffee with a Cop, all those different things, that community piece is important.
Trevor, we mentioned or alluded to, again, back during the day kind of comment, but there was that time in the 70s when there was a huge federal training program dealing with crime prevention, which is no more, no less than engaging the communities, into the churches, talking to groups, connecting with people, security in homes, all of those kinds of things, putting your arms around folks and that kind of thing. Is that too political, either one of you, to get into, to talk about? Is that what we're talking about? Kind of a back up and look and say, wait a minute, what do we need to do different? Does that even work now with the social media platforms? Would we be better to kind of gear something to TikTok for that rather than trying to be there personally? What do we do? I mean, I think that folks would like to hear people like you that are literally in the core of this. I mean, it's got to be sometimes it's like you're standing in the middle of a hurricane, you're in the eye of it and you're seeing it go around. They'd like to know from you, what do you think? What are you seeing? Because they're not their only thing they're seeing, social media platforms, or what some of the major national media platforms are willing to put out. They don't really see what you see.
Yeah, and what they see on the social media thing may or may not be, legitimate at all in terms of accurate news or accurate. You read a headline, right? The headline's there to drive you in.
Yeah.
It may not give you any relevant information once you click on it. But I think, you mentioned political. I don't really even focus on political side of it, but, the right things transcend. Right. So what you're talking about back in the 70s of that is no different than what Robert Peel taught us in Peelian principles, right? The police are the public are the police.
That's it.
And if we never lose sight of that, it doesn't really matter how you approach it and where you approach it, but that philosophy, I think, transcends. But the more you are able to understand people where they are and them when that critical thing happens, the more understanding those folks are of why you did what you did. It stands to reason, right? The biggest, you were asking Scott, what do you want them to know? The thing I would want folks to know is that there's a split second, right? We want to make a judgment about what an officer may have done or didn't do based on a split second, right? Not that many people ever have to live that, right? And if you look comparatively, and this is not to say that when police do wrong or law enforcement makes a mistake, and they do, right? That happens, you can't ignore it. But if you were to sort of compare that to other industries, even medicine, you look at malpractice, it's way worse than mistakes that law enforcement make in terms of numbers of deaths that are attributable. It's crazy. There was a study on this in 2015 on it that's eye-opening. At least it opened my eyes a lot, and realized that force is used in maybe, I think it's still roughly 1% of all citizen interactions nationwide. 1%. But we focus so much on that because it's a one split-second decision. So the more people can understand what went into that decision, then it's easier to to accept.
Which leads me to another observation. We all have seen this. It's been on national media. It's been on state networks. There's certain towns and areas decided that because of the behavioral aspect, we're going to expend X number of hundreds of thousands of dollars to hire folks to go out to talk with folks first. I think they're referred to as the violence interrupters or what have you. Is that something the Academy, at some point in time, do you see the commissions, both the Sheriff's Commission or the Sheriff Standards Commission or the Police Standards Commission, saying, look, Scott, we need you to develop a course in this not law enforcement response that deals with behavior, and it's got to be accredited, and it's got to go. I mean, is that the new arena of law enforcement, or am I missing something?
Did you intend that for
either
everybody?
one?
Okay.
Either both or both. Or both.
I mean, I'll start, and then happy if Scott wants to jump in too. I mean, we have enough to do as it is, and our mission is to train law enforcement, right? And all the minimum standards set forth by both commissions point to that. Now, of course, if the commissions voted for us to do, to implement a training program in that regard or any other way, we're receptive to that. We take our direction from those commissions. I don't know that I see it at that point right now, but we talked about this for the whole interview, right? Is the evolution of things. Who knows where it'll end up? We partner with organizations all the time. It's one of our biggest prideful points is the partnerships we have with a number of stakeholders, sheriffs associations and chiefs associations, and all those groups. Center for Safer Schools, Scott sat on that group as well and partner with a number of people. So one of the things that came out of, I believe, Senate Bill 300 was about us training school personnel on some things. That's not really materialized yet, but we're open to providing a perspective. Right, and I'll let Scott expand on that, I think.
And Scott, I'm not putting either one of you guys on the spot with that, but I see violence interrupters, and I've talked to law enforcement officers, and some of them have looked at me and said, I'm all for that. If they want to go out and talk to somebody that's, in a mental health crisis that, that's broke the windows out of the house or maybe shot holes in their car, if they want to go do that and then call us later, they're all good with that. But there's pieces here that doesn't meet criteria that you guys demand for training. And I think it's concerning to those in the public that do deep thinking about it. Are we getting into an area here that maybe we should have an approach or a standard, should I say, in place? That's kind of where I'm going with that question.
Yeah, I was sort of thinking whenever you said we are already, I don't think you used the term, our plate's pretty full.
Yeah.
But we've talked about the whole show about how trying to stay on top of the training.
Yeah.
And learn from things today and implement it tomorrow. Going that route certainly would require a lot more personnel, and there would have to be a lot into it. I personally hope it doesn't go that way, at least not anytime soon.
But it's a slippery slope.
But it is. And, that person, could go out and potentially de-escalate someone who's in crisis and everything work perfect. And that would be great. But they also may go out and without the proper training to pick up on some cue that this individual is giving, that they're fixing to become violent and combative, that maybe a law enforcement officer has, getting themselves hurt or, even killed based on just a lack of that training and a lack of the tools that law enforcement are given to try to, help with those type of encounters.
I think one of the things you alluded to, Trevor, was that looking at the number of positions you're allotted for, if it moves in that direction, you're going to need maybe 10 times the Scott Granthams to look at that as just a subject matter expertise. And if that's the case, are we then saying, okay, we're going as a society to create a tax base that assures that there's a standard in each county in North Carolina that we have people that will do that? You see where I'm going with that?
I do, and you're touching on something that's very timely right now, is that, we're redoing the entire basic law enforcement training program, right? It's under complete revision right now. And as part of that, some folks across the state had said, we need to put CIT training into basic law enforcement, which is crisis intervention team training. But the T in that is for team, and that's the important part, is that it's very difficult to standardize that level of training because what you have available resource-wise in Wadesboro, and I'm just picking town names, large and small, is way different than what's available in Greensboro, right? So to be able to say, here's a standardized curriculum for you to learn how to do crisis intervention, it's very difficult. Most experts will say it's not an entry-level training program anyway. You need to have some experience before you get into crisis intervention. How are some agencies addressing that otherwise? To Scott's point, the amount of personnel, the money that's required resource-wise to do it, you need professionals. Law enforcement officers are not trained to be mental health professionals, just not. And I'm not arguing we should be. But some agencies, and one comes to mind is under the leadership of Chief Chris Blue in Chapel Hill. They have a mental health unit where they have full-time psychologist level folks who go out and co-respond, right? They'll respond to things. Not every agency can do that, right? Very few can do that.
Especially
right?
small towns and small counties.
Yeah, it's a huge commitment to do that. So that's more of a way longer term approach, and hence why we don't have that as part of what we train, because we don't have that subject matter expertise either.
That becomes tough for the instructor developers, though, when I'm sure if you have folks in your classes and you've developed this lesson plan using the model that is used here, is how do you build that in to be able to deal with those folks that go, wait a minute, that's not what I would do in that situation, because the behavioralists say that's wrong. Help me with understanding, because you just got through doing all that research. You spent hours upon hours validating everything, and now you've got somebody that brings a point to you, and you're going, well, yeah, that's not one of the objectives. I'm just teaching the objectives. But you know and I know we can tell them that, and it's perfectly reasonable. But at the end of the day, you feel that scratching your head moment and going, I missed something because that person's not engaged here.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the things that I think we deal with here at the Academy by having such a large base of really small departments to really large departments, is trying to come up with a cookie cutter approach to each different thing. And in some things that's just impossible. Just like what Trevor was saying, some agencies may have the resources that others don't. So it's hard for me to put something in a lesson plan that I can ensure that everybody has access to. And I know it's sort of off the exact topic, but just as an example of that, Tar Heel Challenge, which I know you're familiar with, a lot of people in our area are familiar with.
I'm very proud of that program.
Yes, is a state program. So that program is highlighted in school resource officer training because of the tool that it can be for a parent, SRO, school administrator to use for a student who is obviously having some major issues, challenging them. But I couldn't put, I go and teach in Wake County, and they may have somebody come in from, I know they have some sort of horse riding program. Where it's for students. Well, I can't put that in our program. It's a great thing, but I can't put it in our program. So coming up with something that works for everybody is difficult, especially in what we do with dealing with everybody across the state. But I will say a lot of times in our class, when something comes up, some person from an agency says, hey, I've run into this, or I'm having this issue, I don't always have the answer. But if there's 30 people in class, generally somebody in that class will have some sort of experience, and they can, enlighten all of us. So, a lot of those answers, a lot of those questions get answered. But as far as having a specific, like I said, cookie cutter approach in a lesson plan, it's just pretty difficult.
Trevor, this is going to be somewhat of an ambiguous observation and question for you. If I had Perry Powell, Marty Stanford, Peggy Schaefer, Mark Strickland, and Trevor Allen in a room, and I would say, what do we need to be looking at training 5 years down the road? Looking at all those, and all those folks I just mentioned were previous directors that you followed. How would that mix look? Again, with somebody with a background in restaurateur, what kind of plate would you lay out in front of somebody?
Yeah, well, I think first, if I got all those folks in a room with me, first thing I'd do is say thanks. Thanks for setting me up for some modicum of success, right? Because
they started the process.
Yeah, they were all special people in their own right, and I still am in contact with Peggy Schaefer quite a bit. See her, consider a friend and a mentor. I would look forward to go, again, our industry tends to go, what has happened, and let's respond to it. And now the focus has to be, what do we project that could happen? Let's look to an eye to the future. And there's some High Point University president had said it better than I think his quote was that, training is anchored to the past. Education is anchored to the future. Training is more or less, let's break down something that's happened. Let's take lessons learned from that and then try to apply that. Education's more, let's get more fundamental and go, let's be projecting what could be out there in the future. So for me would be, help me figure that out. All of you that have been here for a long time, what did you learn along the way in your tenure that you could have said, maybe I could have seen that coming, or my experience having dealt with that led me to see the next thing coming and then help me figure out what that next thing is. So some of those examples for us, and we've learned this in the pandemic, is going virtual with as much training as we can. So a lot of our instructors took the time to figure out, all right, how can I take, you can't drive virtually, at least not yet. You're not gonna be able to shoot a gun virtually yet, that type of thing. But certainly you can do a lot of your lecture-based classes virtually. And we're learning more and more about that every day.
And do you see that being a continuum? That's
I do.
Something,
I absolutely do.
I mean, I don't think it's going to go away.
No, I absolutely see it being expanded on. And the challenge with doing that is, how do you take that, because we develop our classes to be in a written form, to be taken in person. How do we develop those classes and deliver them to the same level of standard with the same knowledge transfer? That same level 3 check to know how it affected them in their job in that virtual sense, when I can't sit across from Scott. We have what we're doing here.
Yeah.
Right. This is how people were meant to communicate.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
And maybe you told me I'm old earlier, so maybe I'm just old and I think that way. But
it's easy for me to say that.
Yeah, there we go. Touche. But I think this is how we're meant to communicate. So how do you figure that format out and keep that integrity?
And I think, Scott, in this conversation, one of the things that strikes me is looking at Trevor's core drivers that I talked about, the right methodology. There's one that we could discuss would be transparency. How transparent should training be? That is, I guess in some cases, folks would say, I don't necessarily want everybody knowing how we approach a shooting situation, because they might decide to put 2 or 3 explosive devices in certain areas if they know we're going to come in the store. How do you bandage and monitor that in developing courses?
Yeah, there are obviously certain tactics that you don't want just anybody to know, and that applies in school setting.
Of course.
Unfortunately, sometimes these situations that occur in school, like active shooters, are the result of a student who has been in that school and school system and knows how things are done, especially whenever active shooter drills or what have you have been done. So they already know a lot of things. But does that outweigh the need for everybody to know what their place is in the role, like in the school? I don't really know the answer to that, but there needs to be some transparency, because people want to know. People want to know what you do and why you do it. I think it was alluded to earlier about some agencies are really, really involved in social media, and I think that, me personally, I think that's a great thing, because they're only putting out what they can. They're still retaining some of that stuff that is needs to be held close. But at least giving the public some information sort of feeds that need to know.
And I think part of it too, Trevor, we talked about this before we went on air today, and especially with this overtime piece we're doing, this is going to be pushed out to social media. So folks are going to be able to probably, if we didn't do that, at what point in time would they ever be able to sit down and have a conversation with the director of Justice Academy and an instructor developer of the school resource program here? Highly unlikely they would.
Yeah.
But now they can pop that up on their phone or what have you, and listen to a conversation with people that's actually putting the ingredients into this picture that's going to be the person there when your child, whoever's watching today, is in a critical situation, active shooter or violence. This is where this is made. This is where the ingredients come together, and this is those 2,000 plus SROs in the state that are representing what, 450 law enforcement agencies, 100 sheriff's
and
departments,
then about 500 plus police departments. So you're over 600 plus agencies.
We're talking a lot of folks out there. So you're not just tweaking a small machine. You're tweaking a major machine.
Yep.
That is weight, gentlemen. That is weight.
It is. And I think it's felt obviously by the agencies. I've said 1,000 times that when I go and talk to a chief of police or a sheriff, I shake their hand and go, I don't know how you do it. I mean, in today's world, it's got to be one of the hardest jobs you could ever have. But I appreciate them. Sure. I appreciate them carrying the flag and moving forward and doing what's right for the right reasons. Transparency wise, though, I definitely agree with Scott. I mean, there are some things I'm very reticent to share. And we have people that will call media requests or public information requests to see things. If it's a SWAT class or a SRO type thing, anything that's tactical based, I do my best not to for those reasons. But for mandated training, like commission mandated training, there's already a process for that. You can go look at any of that at the sheriff's and CJ Standards offices, or you can buy it from a bookstore. It's by administrative code. People can do that. They can call up and order a copy of the basic law enforcement training manual and get it delivered to them.
And a lot of it's online. You can pull a lot of stuff up online. I think that's the piece that folks that are really interested in this and what our conversation is today, if they want to expand that, they can easily reach that. And that's a plus, as Scott pointed out.
Generally, I'm a fan of transparency. I think if things are righteous, they should be able to withstand all things. But when it comes to potentially getting one of our stakeholders hurt or giving away a playbook on keeping your kids safe, I think that's a different story.
Are we on the right track, Scott, for you as a trainer? And I asked Trevor this question earlier, but are we on the right track for you? Is there other things other than obviously manpower, bigger budget? I guess anybody can say I'd take some more of that. But what do you need? I mean, what do you need from police officers? What do you need from communities and families as a trainer, as a person that is developing the guidelines? Do you want to hear from them, and what do you need them to tell you?
Absolutely. Like Trevor said, we're part of a lot of different agencies, and some of those are like nonprofits, and the feedback they give us is great, whether it be SRO related or not. It's good feedback for law enforcement. Again, SRO in the school, first and foremost, is a law enforcement officer. Just because an SRO is in a school doesn't mean they lose any of their traditional law enforcement responsibilities. So everything applies, and the more feedback we can get, the better. I think that just goes without saying.
The important piece is something you alluded to, Trevor, is that, and this is all criminal justice, it's all law enforcement, it's all connected to the public, sheriff's departments and police department. But the administration of those is interesting in that they have different approaches administratively. You get the vote for one, the other is appointed by town and city councils throughout the state, but yet you have two commissions, one standard commission for sheriff, one standards commission for police standards, that pretty much cross channels, but yet sheriffs have some modifications. If folks looked at, they would see this. Is that hard in training for you guys to kind of make sure you're covering the bases for both commissions? Because it's not just one commission. It all falls under the Department of Justice, but it's two different commissions.
I think in some ways it does, but and I have other states. So I'm a member. So my colleague base across the country and internationally is called IADLIST. Yes, which is the International Association of Directors of Law Enforcement Standards and Training.
And a standards thing too. If the department reaches the standard of that, that's a huge step.
Yeah, they do accreditation too. They do that too. But so I'll talk to my colleagues across the country and even internationally who marvel at North Carolina that you have two commissions. You have 68 accredited delivery sites for basic law enforcement. If you go one state south in South Carolina, it's all done in Columbia. There's one organization does it all. It's a lot more simple for them, I think, and simple's not easy. Two different sets. It's less complex, but I applaud both of our commissions because they generally work together pretty well. When it comes to mandating in-service training, both commissions come together to decide that because it affects every officer, every law enforcement officer. So they work together pretty well. I think navigate it better than most would expect they could.
One of the training centers that you focus on here is law enforcement leadership. How have you seen that training evolve since 2017, just since you've been here? Have you seen a lot of changes in that whole program area as it relates to basically credentialing people to be leaders in the law enforcement field?
At multiple levels I have. So if you start just at field training officer level, so we've got a very robust program on field training. Richard Barrick is our instructor that manages that program, and he delivers it all over the place, both campuses, off-site, does presentations for organizations on it. And because of the quality of that program and his delivery, the Criminal Justice Commission made it a best practice to use that. They didn't mandate it for every agency, but labeled as a best practice. So now you've seen more of those agencies now adopt that process and that program for doing field training. So that's one level. But also we revamped our leadership program, what we now call the Leadership Institute. And so instead of being an 11-month, 1 week a month for 11 months, which was a very big ask for most people to be able to send somebody to, it's a big commitment time-wise. We've condensed that into 3 weeks over 3 months, using some research-based fundamentals in leadership from Kouzes and Posner about what actually works, not anecdotal stuff you pick up in any airport bookstore, but what actually works in the public safety realm. But we've evolved that too, though, by doing partnerships with it. So one of those weeks, we've partnered with the UNC School of Government to deliver some content that we don't necessarily have subject matter expertise in. Great partnership to have them because they're at the top of their game. We actually involve a private vendor who does a lot of community engagement things. So where it used to be more high level, just management, leadership, fundamentals and axioms, now it's about where's the rubber meet the road, right? And using those type of vendors actually makes that higher level academic approach to thing and then translates that into actual practice and how it can be used every day.
It sounds like from what I've looked at with that program, it not only meets where the rubber meets the road, it meets the application piece, and it also meets the visionary piece, trying to stay collected with both of those together.
That's
right. We've kind of took this thing into overtime, and we could be here for a long time. I want to thank you guys for what you do and for your commitment to the job that you're doing. Also, thank you for obviously being on this show. And I would like to encourage people as we kind of close today, if you'd like to hear more about this, if you want to hear more conversation about what justice people and law enforcement people do and what your expectation should be, let us know. Email me at weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. Contact the director of the Academy, contact Scott. We'd like to kind of continue this conversation and maybe format it for you in a way that we can reach larger scopes of the public. So this has been enlightening for me, and I'm going to give you, each one of you, time to close with whatever comment you would have, and I'll start with you, Scott.
Oh, put me on the spot.
Why not?
Yeah. Thanks obviously for having me come on the show and talk a little bit about school resource officers and try to answer any questions. If I could leave, everybody with anything, is know that we at the Academy, as well as other training folks that, I deal with across the state, are doing everything we can think of, everything we've learned to prepare officers to make the right choices and do the right thing, so that ultimately, especially in my world, that staff and students at schools are as safe as they can be. If there's anything that we can do to try to do more, please let us know. Always open to new ideas, but we want to do what works. So,
good point.
Again, thanks for
absolutely.
For having
Thank
us.
you.
I would close by saying thanks to Scott and the rest of they make my job easy. When I have folks and you've heard the subject matter expertise and the passion that Scott has for his programs, that goes across the board in all of our programs. So thanks to our staff for doing that. And it helps me demonstrate the Attorney General's commitment that he has towards law enforcement training, which is huge. But also thanks to you for giving us that opportunity. This is connecting people, right? And that's what we need to do more of now than ever, is connecting people in the story. So thanks for doing this. Thanks for giving us this outlet to do it. We do tours and demonstrations for groups all the time. We had a group of interns here last week from Raleigh that came down to see some things. We've had church groups and school groups come. So we have options for that. If a group wants to do that, happy to talk to them and, let them take a run on the simulator and get in a car and go on the driving track and do that kind of thing. So all about that type of outreach.
Well, it's been great, and we've enjoyed this conversation. We hope we can continue to do more things. I encourage folks to sit down and think about what we've talked about today. I also am one of these people, for me, I can't project it for everybody, but for me, I think we need a more closeness to core values. And for me, that comes from my faith-based belief. And I always close my shows with, may God bless. And certainly I would say, may God bless all you do and guide you. And so from this point on, ladies and gentlemen, let us know what you think. We look forward to seeing you again next time.